So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross that read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews," but that this man claimed to be the King of the Jews. Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. "Let's not tear it," they said to one another. "Let's decide by lot who will get it." This happened that the scripture might be fulfilled that said, "They divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment." So this is what the soldiers did. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son." And to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, his disciple took her into his home. We have already mentioned how John's Gospel is quite restrained in describing the events of Jesus' death, and as we see again in this passage, and John seems to be primarily concerned here in this part with 4 key areas. One is that Jesus carried his own cross, that is the horizontal bar that would have been placed on his shoulders. The vertical stake would probably have already been present on a hilltop, and he would be crucified along with 2 other brigands there. John is particularly interested in a notice, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. It's Pilate's last comeuppance, his last dig at the chief priest and the leaders. And they see what he is doing. He is making it public knowledge that this is what the Roman Empire does to those who would claim to be King of the Jews, but more significantly, and that sort of leads to the protest from the chief priests, he has said, well, this is what your leaders and your chief priests have done. They have handed your king over to me to be crucified. Hence their protest, which he refuses to acquiesce to. The casting of lots and division of garments for John shared among 4 shares among the soldiers seems to be mentioned mainly because John, as do the other Gospels, sees it as a fulfillment of Psalm 22:18, which is in many of all the Gospels, a psalm that is closely associated to the crucifixion of Jesus. And John wants to make the point that there were eyewitnesses of the crucifixion of Jesus. His mother, who curiously is never named in John's Gospel, people would have known who she was, but it is just an interesting peculiarity of John's Gospel that she's never called by her name Mary. We then don't know if these are 2 different people, his mother's sister and Mary the wife of Clopas, or whether his mother's sister was Mary the wife of Clopas and Mary Magdalene. And we're told that the disciple whom Jesus loved, who is associated as the eyewitness behind the gospel, was standing with his mother. Why was he there and other disciples were not? Maybe because he was braver. Some think it's maybe because he was younger, so unlikely to be regarded as a threat by the Roman authorities, and he had connections in the high priest family, so it was safer for him to be there. It's interesting that we see both Jesus' care for Mary and for the disciple, in the sense that he and gives them to each other. This is your son. Here is your mother. But also how the Christian faith, to a certain extent, redraws the bounds of kinship and family. We know that Jesus had other brothers. In fact, some of them would be later, they had rejected him, but would become believers later on. But it's interesting that he handed his mother over at that moment to the care of the disciple, who took her into his own home. Just reminding us that the Christian bonds of fellowship and care transcend ordinary human family bloodline bonds.